Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Neighbor. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey everybody, today we have David Katz on the show, or DKatz as he's lovingly known. David is the Vice President of Global Sales at Tession. Tession has raised $60 million from legendary security investors like Sequoia and Excel, and they have over 150 employees located in New York, San Francisco, and London. Prior to Tession, David was the Senior Director of Global Sales and Customer Solutions at Intercom. He was responsible for the account executive, account management, sales engineer, and customer success teams. There are 100 people on those teams globally across the Americas, EMEA, and APAC. Prior to Intercom, David was the Director of Mid-Market and Enterprise Sales at Dropbox, responsible for a regional direct sales team of more than 40 mid-market and enterprise account executives. They had the largest P&L globally for Dropbox of any team. Before Dropbox, David was the Mid-Market Sales Manager at LinkedIn, and he also managed sales development teams while at LinkedIn as well. Here we go. DKatz, awesome to have you on the show. It's great to see your bearded face. How are you?
I'm great, B-Nabes. And for those at home, we should also clarify what our full names are, although nicknames are great. I think I once called you just B-Nabes or even Beautiful Nabes. I don't know if you remember that. I mean, that's going pretty deep back into the archives of my history and memory.
It's pretty good. If you call me beautiful, first of all, I think I do remember you calling me that. Second of all, you may be the only person that's ever called me that. So if I don't remember, that's pretty bad because that's an amazing story for myself. Thank you for that. Appreciate the confidence boost as we get started. And I'm just looking to match your beard skills and your hairstyle. I feel like you've nailed the combo.
So for those at home who are just listening to the audio, if you went and actually just Googled David Katz at Tession or found me on LinkedIn, you would see this shiny bald head. And yeah, I mean, when we worked together, I had some hair. But maybe one of the, or two of the things we'll talk about is the high pressure environments I put myself in more recently that caused me to lose all said hair. But I will also say, dude, if this look without a beard and glasses to soften it up, if you can imagine this without glasses, here, I'll take them off so you can see. Now that if you take those things away, you're getting into the Dr. Evil territory, and I don't know if that's necessarily a look that is inviting and encouraging a future conversation. So anyways, appreciate that.
It's an evolution, but I'm sure you perfected the morning routine pretty well with the head and the beard. And the glasses. It's got to be a pretty solid morning routine at that point.
Less than 5 minutes.
Nice. Every guy wants to hear that. All right, so let's hop into a couple things. One, we'll go through some personal stuff first. Mr. Smarty Pants grew up in New Hampshire. Went to Syracuse. He's got some interesting history around interested in debate and government and voracious reader, obviously. And I'm sure that started at a really young age. We'll talk about all that fun stuff as a kid, what you were like. And then we'll hop into the professional stuff, talk about some of your superpowers, talk about the tech businesses you've worked with, and ultimately get into, your superpower mindset as well as methodology and some frameworks around some of the things you're really good at. Sound okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Let's start personal first. So 5,000 population town, Lake Winnipesaukee. I'm totally going to screw up any one syllable of that, I'm sure. But
you said it right.
Well, jackpot. So you grew up in that town. Let's talk about what was like being DKatz as a kid? What were you interested in? And what were some of your hobbies and things you were good at growing up?
I was a high energy, and devious child, but not in a malicious way. I wasn't getting arrested or lighting Barbie dolls on fire per se, but I was a bit of a menace to society, or to my teachers at least. I definitely was always pushing the boundaries of what I could feel I could get away with. And I feel like that's pretty much just continued throughout my entire life. Let's just see how far we could push this. And now I'm being penalized by having a 2.5-year-old that's doing the same thing. And what my mom used to tell me as a kid is now coming true, which is, I hope you have a son just like you someday. For better or for worse, that's coming to fruition with my 2.5-year-old. So yeah, I mean, you said it. I grew up in a small town, 5,000 people. And it was an amazing, beautiful place to grow up. It just wasn't super diverse. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to be exposed to a lot of different things. it was a very touristy, heavy environment that I grew up in. The population would, grow by like 10x in the summer. People loved coming up to the lake. I mentioned you earlier, Jimmy Fallon named his daughter after Lake Winnie, this lake I grew up on. It's just like a beautiful, nice, small town to kind of grow up on. But yeah, it was interesting, always interested in government affairs and debate. I had this amazing teacher in high school, Mr. Zuloff, who was very supportive and encouraging. I just felt a strong connection to, and from taking classes with him, decided to really pursue a career in political science and public policy, or at least thought I wanted to. So that's what I went to school for, up in upstate New York at Syracuse University.
Very cool. Shout out to Mr. Zuloff. I like that. So one more thing about DKatz growing up. What were you interested in? What was the first thing you did to make money? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So I was very interested in extreme sports growing up, or what I thought were extreme sports at the time. So I was a bit of a daredevil. I spent a lot of time in the emergency room. But I was very into freestyle skiing, wakeboarding, mountain biking, hiking, climbing, pretty much anything where I could lose a sense of gravity for some small period of time. I really enjoyed as a child. And it wasn't until my 20s where I started having real serious injuries that I didn't rebound from so quickly. And I decided maybe I need to slow down on this. But yeah, I was a bit of a speed freak. I wanted to go, high and far in the air, do whatever I was doing. So I was, outside of school and things I was interested in politics, I was really first and foremost interested in just thrill and just kind of chasing that feeling as a kid.
That matches your personality. It comes out in all types of different parts of your life now, which is great, even in conversation. Okay, so I have 100 questions on that stuff, but we've got to move on. So I won't indulge in my own curiosity. So you're going through high school. You're making a decision to go to upstate New York, Syracuse University, the Orange, which I think is like one of 11 schools that have a mascot that don't end in S. I believe something like that. 1 of 10 or 1 of 11. We don't need to go through the trivia, but that's actually a fun trivia question. So why do you make that decision to go to Syracuse, and walk us through what you were like for a couple minutes while you were at Syracuse?
Yeah, first and foremost, I didn't get into Georgetown, which was my number one, and I didn't get in, and I was pretty bummed about that. Honestly, I just really wanted to be in DC. I really wanted to be in that environment because I really want to study political science and public policy. But I would say, in hindsight, I was very fortunate that I didn't get in, that I went to Syracuse. It was an incredible program that I could be part of. I met my future wife and mother of our son, and soon to be our second son. She's due literally any day now.
Shout out to Shayna.
Yep, shout out to Shayna. And yeah, so it worked out for the best. One of the things that was really attractive to me about Syracuse was the curriculum for the public policy program was very hands-on. It was actually a much less academic approach to learning. Most of the curriculum was made up of internships and kind of co-op style work. So you literally get thrown in the deep end. Even as early as being a freshman and a pimply-faced 18-year-old there, I was working on different programs with the Syracuse Housing Authority, and getting to be involved in the community at a young age really kind of shaped the way I thought about learning in our education system more broadly, which is probably another topic for another time of things I like to do much, much later in life regarding education. But I was super fortunate. It was just super hands-on curriculum. So you actually got to get out there in the world and mix it up and meet people. But probably most importantly was the head of the department, Dr. Bill Copeland, who I got to be a teacher's assistant for, told me, I can't remember, but I was either a junior or a senior. He told me, he's like, Katz, you're wasting your time, man. This isn't going to be your career. You're going to be in sales. And I've said this before in other podcasts, but I was so offended by that. Because I also didn't, growing up in a small town in New Hampshire, I didn't know anything about sales other than the guy at the Foot Locker trying to sell me shoes, or the guy selling my parents their car. That was my only sense of what sales was growing up.
I always say that's viewed as a dirty word oftentimes. We're coming around, but it's a bit of a dirty word as you're growing up.
Yeah, and it was to me certainly when I was a young student. But I'm fortunate that he did plant that seed, and it ended up coming to fruition years later, and I partially credit him for that.
Cool. So you meet Shayna, you're going through university, and you're going to make your first decision on what's next after uni. So why don't we do this? Walk us through. We're going to get up to LinkedIn, and then we're going to hop through LinkedIn, Dropbox, Intercom, and your recent move to Tessian. We're going to hop through those with some some questions and going a little bit deeper on your playbook, but walk us through your decision out of school for the first job that you got up to, and then all the way through LinkedIn. And then we'll stop at LinkedIn and we'll pause for a couple of different things I want to talk about. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, totally. So, coming out of uni, as you said, and for the Americans, that also means college. But having led and worked with international teams, it's definitely called uni or university outside the States. Same with resumes; they're called CVs, right, or curriculum vitae.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
like the world. I think I did the calculation on this. Like 5% of the world's population or so is in the U.S. and 95% is outside. You do the math; it's actually staggering as to how much the sociopolitical environment, as well as a whole bunch of other things that the U.S. does make decisions on, affects the other 5% of the world. But the disproportionate amount of people that actually vote for those things, which is like 1.7 to 2% at any given time, depending on how many people vote of the world's population, votes on and has say in what types of things happen in our environment in the U.S. that then subsequently affect the rest of the world. And I just always think it's interesting when we talk about some of that terminology, because when all those folks are listening, they think to themselves, obviously it's called that, but it's just funny because that's their mindset, obviously. Anyways, keep going.
And now it'll come back later too. I think, when you join new companies, part of the onboarding experience is just getting a sense of, are we speaking the same language? Because every company I've joined, and I'm sure this has been similar for you and more recently your consulting experience, people use terms so interchangeably. And what I learned early on is don't take that for granted and make sure you're really clear. Like when you say that, what do you actually mean? Especially if you're going to work with companies that have international teams, people interpret language very differently. And even when I say inside sales and what that means here in the States, that's viewed very differently, has a different connotation in Europe. So anyways, just a little point there. So yeah, coming out of school. So I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. I just realized through my internships in school that I didn't want to pursue a career short-term, in the government and kind of, nonprofit space. And I honestly, through a weird series of events, just fell completely backwards into a very interesting small executive search firm called J. Robert Scott that was a wholly owned subsidiary of Fidelity Investments. And it was I'd never heard of it. It's not something people go to school and study and say, I want to work in executive search when I grow up. I had no idea recruiting was a thing in an industry, and it's actually massive. And so I fell backwards into it, and it was just the biggest point of luck in my early career to have that type of opportunity, because I got exposed to so many cool people in cool industries. So we worked with, hardware, software, medical device, biopharmaceutical companies. We primarily worked with early stage venture capital backed companies, and we were working to bring additions into their executive team as they were growing and reaching different stage of maturity. We would help them add different roles and functionality and expertise to their executive teams. And so it was such a cool way to essentially get paid to have an MBA. Straight out of school, and I got exposed to a lot of very interesting people and got a sense of the way the world works, at least as it pertains specifically to the VC world.
Awesome. I love the narrative to that value prop as well. That's really cool, because you say executive search, it can mean so many different things for the value prop. I like that narrative a lot. So J. Robert Scott, wholly owned by Fidelity Investments, and you're at J. Robert Scott. What's the biggest thing you learned from there? And then why the jump to LinkedIn?
The biggest thing I learned was there's no reason that I can't aspire to be a successful executive at a company at some point in time. And the reason I say that is I met so many people. I was like, how the hell did you become CEO and president of this company? And it honestly, it's kind of funny and to say it that way, but it gave me a lot of confidence. I'm I can do this. There's, and I think when you're young, or if you're a sales rep, or if you're an aspiring, executive within the commercial realm, or really any role, I think you look at these people and you put them on such a pedestal. And the reality is they're just humans like you and I. And getting to sit in on some of these board meetings and hear the things that they would discuss, I was like, yeah, these people aren't that special. In many cases they really think they are. But there's no reason why others can't have the type of success that they are at least perceived to have if you just work hard and kind of pursue the right things.
Nice one. That's great. I like that. That's it's really good takeaway. And so you're moving.
You probably weren't expecting me to say that. You thought I was going to say something completely different. Something that would have made more sense, like the importance of hiring the right talent and talent's key to everything. And yeah, I could have said that, but you know what? No, that's what I really learned personally and selfishly.
So you're making the jump to LinkedIn. Why do you make that decision? And kind of walk us through your journey at LinkedIn for the time that you were there for each of the roles you subsequently jumped into.
Yeah. So when I was working in executive search, I had an opportunity to move to San Francisco and help our firm establish a West Coast presence. And so we actually hired a partner from one of the big executive search firms on the West Coast, Heidrick & Struggles, amazing firm, been around for a very long time, very successful. And I don't know if they're public now, but they were at one point in time. And anyways, we hired this awesome partner, Eric Lund, and we had a great working relationship. We got to work on a couple projects together and really established like a good working relationship. And he invited me to come out to the Bay Area and work with him. So I leapt at the opportunity, convinced my then girlfriend, now wife, to move out with me. But as soon as I got here, like, it's just, the environment's infectious. It's so hard not to get excited about wanting to go and work for one of these companies. And I was just so envious being on the outside looking in. And, after about a year of helping Eric kind of establish our West Coast practice, hire some other folks to join the firm, I was like, I got to go get into one of these companies. And I started thinking, what I want to do functionally, like what kind of role would I want to go for? And then what type of company? And I think given my more recent experience, when I decided to leave J. Robert Scott, I was doing selling, and I didn't really realize it. I was selling candidates on thinking about opportunities outside of the present when they had. I was selling those candidates then on, our clients that we were working with to help them kind of place people at the companies they were invested in and part of. And then I was selling other potential clients on hiring us to do work for them. And so I didn't realize it because it was in like a less structured way I didn't have quotas per se. Like you more traditionally did in sales or in a SaaS sales role. But really I was in sales. And it was a pretty challenging role because it's not a business risk, it's personal career risk, right? You're selling people on why they should think about, leaving one, role as an executive for another one that might be much more risky. And so it took a lot of listening, and I really learned how to listen very carefully to what was really important to people to see if it would be the right opportunity. But anyway, so then I figured out, okay, sales is probably somewhere I could play. And then I started thinking about what's a product that I'm super passionate about. I spent all day on LinkedIn, as anyone in recruiting would, right? And so I decided that I wanted to pursue a sales career specifically in LinkedIn. I actually didn't apply anywhere else. I didn't even apply to LinkedIn. I cold called my way in. There's a guy, and I've told the story before, about Tyler Hubbs, who had a background similar to me. And I literally cold called, left him a voicemail, and he actually called me back and invited me down for lunch. And I got to go down and meet in Mountain View with him and with some of the team and our then VP of Sales, James Bolpentest, who I know you're very familiar with and worked for. And it was at a point where, LinkedIn was growing like crazy, and they were like, yeah, like we'll take a shot on this guy. And I think like the opportunity cost was low enough that they were willing to kind of take a bet on someone who'd never done software sales before. And so I joined as a sales rep, and that was, I think I accepted my offer towards the end of 2010. And I joined, I think at the very beginning, I think I joined in January 2011.
January 5th, 2011. That was our start date. Nice one. Okay, so you make that jump. Now walk us through your journey at LinkedIn for the different roles that you had.
So I started as an account executive and loved it. Learned mostly through trial and error, just because it was such a fast-paced environment and things were kind of like half-built as you would imagine they would be at a company at that stage and for how fast they're moving. But I was super fortunate given the kind of culture at that company. And it's still the culture at the time. It was just so collaborative and so focused on development. And my peers around me were so willing to invest in me and give me time and let me shadow and learn more about their processes. They would sit in on my process and give me advice. And so I was fortunate. I got off to a pretty quick start at the beginning of the year. And then about halfway through the year, we had this weird situation where, there was a cohort of us that were doing pretty well. And then there was several cohorts of people who were not. And there was like this huge gap where there was either people like blowing out their numbers, or there were people really not even coming close to their targets. And we had pretty aggressive goals that year, and we were getting ready to file and go public. And so it was important to get to more predictability in the business. And so they offered me and several other folks this opportunity to become like a team lead, which at the time I thought was like the coolest thing ever. And if I actually think more critically about it, I'm like, wait a minute, like. I was kind of taken advantage of here. They're like, hey, how does this sound? We're going to pay the same amount of money, but we're going to, quadruple your risk. And we're going to have you take on quotas for 4 other people. Don't worry about the fact that you've closed more revenue than all 4 of them combined in the first half of the year. Like, this is probably going to work out just fine. And, when I joined LinkedIn, one of my mantras early on was, I wanted to like really be part of this journey, and I wanted to sign up and take risk. And I wasn't sure if sales was the right thing for me. I wasn't sure if software and tech was the right thing for me. But I told myself, like, look, I'm young. At this point, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a mortgage. I'm just going to say yes. I'm going to take on as much risk as an opportunity as I can and see what comes of it. And so I jumped at it. I didn't really think about it too much. And was like, great, let's see if we can figure it out. And we did, in that second half of the year. I'm proud to say that the team I got to work with were, exceptional people, and their willingness to listen to some punk kid who didn't have a ton of experience in SaaS sales and work with me and work as a team was incredible. And we turned around and we hit our second half targets. 3 of the 4 folks, actually hit and achieved their annual target. Some of them got promoted. And that was the big inflection point for me. That was when I realized like I had found my calling. And I'm so fortunate and honestly just lucky that relatively early on in my career, I had this aha moment where I was like, this is what I was meant to do.
Very cool. Very cool. So walk us through then your navigation into leading sales dev teams, and then your mid-market sales management role that you had. And then we'll hop into one topic that I want to talk about, because I know you started flexing your muscle pretty hard on at LinkedIn, and then we'll jump into Dropbox.
Yeah. So after those 6 months as a team lead, I jumped at like any opportunity I could find to get into a management role, because I was like, this is what I want to be doing. And I was fortunate enough, there was an opening for a role managing a sales development team in San Francisco. And I interviewed for and got the role. And, we actually, this is where B Naves and I got closest. We actually were both peers and were managing sales development teams. And our boss, Jeff, at the time, like, I think somewhat begrudgingly gave me the role. Like, I think he had his concerns. And if anyone, this is a total inside joke, but if you knew Jeff, you would know, like, he's not afraid to just tell you his concerns early on and just make sure they're out there and open, which is something that I learned is actually an incredible trait to have, is just be open, honest, and transparent with people. And he told me why he gave me the role, but he also listed all the concerns he had and things he wanted to make sure I avoided early on. And luckily, but I'm fortunate he gave me the role, and he gave me a lot of coaching, especially in the early days, on how to be successful as a people manager, as a first-time people manager.
He's he's masterful at both of those things. Masterful.
Yeah, he's just he tells you what you need to hear. It's an incredible skill. So yeah, I inherited a team. My initial team was 15 or 16 reps, which is like twice the size of the team you should give to a first-time manager. And on top of that, Jeff was my boss, but it was in Dublin. So like we had this 8-hour time difference. So it wasn't like he was on the floor helping me all the time, or if I had like some in the moment need, I didn't have him to go to. But luckily I had some amazing peers that I worked with closely in the San Francisco office that would help kind of guide me and make sure I didn't screw up too bad. So I did that for a year. It was amazing. I loved it. Working with developing, people early on in their careers who want to pursue sales was just like such a rewarding experience. And I quickly made my goal just to get as many of them promoted as I possibly could and get them on to the next role. And this is where I actually learned about the power of brand and being viewed as a multiplier in people's careers, and how that would always mean I would have my pick of the most talented people to recruit. And so advice for any of you who are in a management role at a slightly larger organization where there's a lot of internal promotion, you want your brand to be known as a multiplier. You don't want to be viewed as an empire builder who just hoards the best talent. That will serve you well in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to bite you in the ass. You want to be known as the person who's focused on the development career of others. And if you do that, people will be knocking down your door to get on your team. And I feel fortunate, like I was able to establish my brand that way. And look, it served people well on my team, but selfishly, like it served me well too. I always had the most talented people wanting to work with and for me. So it worked for all of us. So I got to do that for a year. And then in my last year at LinkedIn, I went back to actually managing a team I initially joined, which is such a weird full circle to go through in my time at LinkedIn. And so I got to go manage account executives, SMB and mid-market account executives that next year at LinkedIn as well. And cool enough, got to bring some of the sales development reps that I hired along the way on that journey with me.
Awesome. Okay. So I know that you started flexing really hard a muscle around hiring, and especially onboarding and hiring, and bringing on great talent. By the way, the skill that you just mentioned, and it's talent, but also a skill that you just mentioned, but you're naturally good at it. So it's talent around making sure that you become and are known as a multiplier. Like that just has so much more effect on not just the people that are coming to work for you, people that have worked with you, but like the people that are your peers. Like your peers would want to come work for you also, or the people that you've worked for would want to come work for you also and work with you because that's your style. It's given back to you company over company, role over role. I mean, I feel that personally towards you, and I know a lot of people that have worked with you feel that way as well. Not just the people that are working for you. So it's got an amazing effect and a big halo, including sideways and up. But one of the things I know that you started flexing your muscle on is hiring and onboarding great talent. Let's talk about your philosophy around hiring and bringing on great talent, which you've done well beyond obviously those roles into Dropbox, into Intercom, into Tession now. So what is your philosophy around hiring great talent? And let's go through some of the methodology you have. If you have any best practices around each piece of that process as you try to bring them on board, from profiling the role, sourcing and interviewing them, evaluating, closing, onboarding, etc. So what's your philosophy and what's kind of your methodology and your process that you go through with some tactics that you use?
Yeah, First, I would say I'm a recruiter's worst nightmare as a former recruiter to work with as a hiring manager. If any of them were listening to this, they'd probably laugh. And I think ultimately we have good working relationships, but to say I expect a lot and have a very high bar for hiring is an understatement. I would say what I learned from my recruiting experience, and then what I learned from some mentors early on, was the two things I was hiring for were mentality and then dynamic. And I think the second one is something that people don't pay enough attention to when they're hiring. And I think it's really important to be intentional when you're putting a team or teams together, that you also need to be hiring for a team dynamic. And you have to have the right blend of backgrounds and experiences of people on that team. And if you just hire a lot of people with the right mentality that are just high achieving people, but won't create the right team dynamic, that team's not going to be actually as effective as they otherwise could be. So I pretty quickly realized that you needed to hire for diversity and hire for a specific dynamic. And that ultimately meant that there were times where I passed on people that I knew would have been very successful individually, but wouldn't have been additive to the team and the team dynamic. I would say that's a big thing I learned early on at LinkedIn. And the second thing I learned was you have to be intentional. So what I mean by that is intentional around your recruiting process and your interview process, and be consistent. I think the tendency when you're moving really quickly and are in an environment where you're hiring fast is you just need to just hire great people and set them free. And I think people don't spend enough time up front really defining and being intentional about what their hiring process should be. What are the types of interview questions and interview experiences and exposures you want to have for that person that's coming in, to make sure you're consistently testing for certain things to see if they're going to be successful in your environment, but also make sure that they're going to be happy in your environment and for the state that you're in. And I definitely learned the hard way several times that you need to hire for the current state of things and don't oversell an opportunity or a role. You should not be afraid to talk about all the hairy problems that your company has. And the people that are going to be right for you, like when you mention all the challenges that you and the team are facing, they're going to light up. They're going, literally, you'll watch their body language change if you're in the room with them, where they're going to lean in and be like, tell me more about that. Like, they're going to be attracted to those types of problems in that environment. And so often I see people, especially at high growth companies, trying to hire people who've just been there and done that at larger companies and have been, quote unquote, in the end zone, so to speak. And that's really risky, because if you've hired people who've only worked at very large established companies, they might have great training, but they might not possess the mindset to be successful in a fast-paced, ambiguous environment.
I like that. So very quickly, you've hired a lot of people in a spectrum of different roles. Can you go through and talk about how you onboard really good talent as well? What are some of the things you've learned about onboarding great talent that you felt have been consistent regardless of the role that you're bringing on? Yeah,
that's a good one. I think onboarding is a staged, kind of sequenced process that you can't try to throw everything at someone up front in the first 2 weeks. They're not going to retain 90% of the information you give them. And so I think you need to be very specific and intentional around, the prioritization of what they need to know and at what time they need to teach them it. And really make sure you get the sequencing right there. And that'll be the difference between an okay onboarding and a really rapid one. Is like, what's really critical in the first, couple quarters for this person to know and learn, and really focus just on those things, and then get comfortable not teaching someone some of the finer skills that they're going to need, 6 or 12 months later, and stage it out. Make sure that those things are things you focus on as like the next onboarding once they're 6 or 9 months in. So really think about those things. The other thing I would say about onboarding is I'm a huge fan of situational leadership theory, or the Hersey Blanchard theory on coaching. And for those, go Google it and check it out. You can watch a quick video, or look at just a Google image on and kind of map it out. But the other thing I realized early on is no matter how much experience someone has that you're hiring, their early onboarding, you actually need to be very explicit and very directive with them around what you expect and what you want them to do. And no matter how much experience they have, they actually find a lot of confidence in having this like blanket of you being really directional. And I think the hesitation people have is like, well, I don't want to micromanage someone. And like, I don't want to seem like I'm being overly burdensome on them. It's like, no, I know that's your instinct of us, and we don't want to do that because no one really likes to be micromanaged. But early on, when you're new to a company, people find a lot of safety and confidence in that. So I think it's really important to be directive early on. Also, be very clear early on around the expectations of the role. Define what excellence looks like in the role and how someone should be kind of conducting themselves, and what their performance should look like over time, and what behaviors they should exhibit and how they match back to your cultural values. Really lay that out early on. I can't tell you how many people I talk to where I'm like, what are your cultural values and how do you talk about them in the first 2 weeks of onboarding? And they're like, I can't, or even just companies that I've interviewed or spent time with or advised, where I ask them like what their cultural values, like if you can't name them off the top of your tongue immediately, something's missing there. You need to go back and revisit that.
Awesome. All right, DKatz, let's move into your jump into Dropbox. Why'd you move there? Walk us through a couple minutes, the roles that you had, and then we're going to stop and talk about one or two topics there as well.
So I moved there because of a lack of patience and a naivete, most likely. Like, I think, I got my first taste of success at LinkedIn. And if we're being honest with each other, I probably took it a bit for granted. Like, I look back on it so fondly, and I made so many incredible friends and mentors, and I learned so much. And like, as I said, it literally changed the trajectory of my career, and it helped me find my calling. But like, if I'm being honest, could I have stayed for a couple more years and learned a lot more? Yeah. Did I probably prematurely leave because I thought I'd figured out everything in the world? Yes. I was definitely in that category of millennial first-time people leader who knew everything. And also just assumed that all of my success was due to like my own skill and wasn't any element of luck or just working for an amazing company with an amazing product. So like, I definitely felt this sense of like, I'm owed this opportunity. And like, all of a sudden this company Dropbox comes along, and, everyone at that point in time had heard of it. It's one of the hottest companies out there. They raised a stupid amount of money at a stupid valuation. And for whatever reason, like, they were willing to give me this opportunity to come and build something. And that was an opportunity I wasn't going to have, immediately at LinkedIn. And I decided to go and pursue it. And, looking back on it, it was the best thing I ever could have done, but it was also 10 times harder than I thought it was going to be. I was all of a sudden out there in the real world, and building something from scratch without a lot of mentors or people who could coach me along the way or provide a playbook to me that I could rely on. And I had a lot of really brutal, hard lessons in those early days, and that's when I started to lose my hair, most likely. It was just and so I don't regret it. It was amazing, and the type of talent and the things I learned from that experience were just incredible. And I was so fortunate to work with such incredibly talented people at Dropbox. And, it's funny, so many of us stay in very close touch and look back at like this, this alumni association we have of former Dropboxers. And it's incredible. And how willing people are kind of around the globe to just drop what they're doing and help you if you guys overlap together at Dropbox is just insane. It was really special. So it was definitely that naivete.
Nice, good one. And then what were you responsible for? Walk us through your jumps to while you were at Dropbox.
Yeah, so I came in to help them build a outbound kind of direct sales motion and go-to-market strategy for their SMB and mid-market segments. At that time when I got there really wasn't a business product. They were just getting ready to launch it. They'd been playing around with like a early iteration of it, and they were doing pretty well from a self-serve perspective. And they had some early traction with a small enterprise team, just going out and literally trying to just win logos. But no one was paying attention to or focusing on like SMB and mid-market at all as a segment. And so I was brought in to help them see if we could figure out a direct sales motion to cover those segments in North America. And so early days, it was about trying to understand and build out a playbook of, what did we think the go-to-market motion was going to be? Why would people want Dropbox for business? What problems could it solve for them? And then why did they need that in addition to what they were getting for free from Microsoft or Google, or they were already paying for it from Box? And so we're kind of figuring out what our value proposition would be. And then once we figured it out, we started thinking around what was the hiring profile of people we wanted to bring that would help us figure out something that wasn't completely built. And so I spent a lot of time focused on those things. And then, I joined there, let's see, that was the end of 2013. And we did some light hiring early, but then we really hit the go button in 2014. And I hired, in the first 5 quarters, so including Q4 of 2013, I hired 55 people. In order to hire those 55 people, I must have interviewed upwards of 500 plus. Yeah, definitely more than 500. So it was crazy. I pretty much spent all days and night interviewing. But it was wild. And we had some early success. We found something that felt repeatable. We found kind of our ideal customer profile. We started figuring out the value proposition, why they would need us, how we could make that sales motion repeatable. And then we started training the team on it.
Awesome. So one of the things that you've done multiple times in your career is across different companies is building that upstream motion from whether it's a B2C to B business or a B2B business. One of the things you've done multiple times is managing and building out that playbook for the upstream motion to go SMB and mid-market enterprise. What does that playbook look like for you? And what are the steps that you need to take in order to be successful as you're building out and executing on that playbook?
Yeah, it's a really fun motion. And to your point, I did that both at Dropbox and then at Intercom as well, right, where we were moved from a very down market, more self-serve kind of motion, or at least certainly an acquisition strategy, where it's kind of like, hey, get in, land, and then through kind of viral organic growth and like strong product adoption and product love, we'll see some natural kind of organic growth after they become a customer. And we saw that at Dropbox and at Intercom. But I think, and in both cases, what was also similar is, and why I joined in both cases was there was this sense that you could just move that self-service, very efficient acquisition model up market and start winning larger and larger customers over time. And what they realized in both cases was, no, that wasn't the case. And there's kind of a natural breaking point where you get to a certain company size where you have clear definition of roles and subject matter experts and decision-making processes where the buyer is now all of a sudden removed from the end user. And where those things start to separate is usually where the self-serve motion tends to stop working really well. And so what you have to do once you figure out you've reached that point of, ultimate decision maker and end user are now separate, is start thinking about how are we going to go to these decision makers, outbound after them and get their attention and interest and tell them why they should be thinking about us. And also the way you market, the look and feel of your company. B2C marketing is very different, is much more user focused than B2B. And then, the same can be said for more SMB mid-market kind of marketing focus, and product marketing in general and brand are very different than enterprise. And if you go and look at companies, you can see this where, within SMB mid-market, you're still closer to the end user, so you can be more playful. Like your messaging is more playful. People are more willing to take risk. There's less cost for picking the wrong solution, right? The deal sizes are smaller. The deal cycles are less. And ultimately, if someone makes a mistake, it's okay and you can kind of move on. Whereas you start getting into these larger companies with a lot of legacy technology and systems, it's going to be very challenging to just switch something on in their environment, get the adoption you would at a smaller company. And so the risk is much higher. And so therefore also the education around how you're going to make them successful, the trust you need to build with them is much different. And what I always found interesting from Dropbox and Intercom was trying to figure out the timing of how fast you move up market. And there's no great scientific way to go about it. Anyone tells you they figure out the science, I think is lying to you. There's an art to it of trying to figure how quickly you can move your product up to larger companies and win them in a repeatable way. And then also, what are the one-off, really large companies that you're willing to go way up market for to win, knowing it's going to take a ton of your resource and time to make them successful. And you have to set the right expectations with them around what your product can and can't do. And in the short term, they're going to want to have a very heavy hand in your roadmap. and you've got to be willing to hear them out on that. But like trying to figure the timing of, how quickly can you take a certain product and a team up market, because the sales motion is different. So there's a lot of education of your sales team and training to get them ready for that. Many times you're hiring in a different profile as you're moving more up market of sales rep. The way you do lead generation is very different. You go from a lot more online webinars to live events and industry events, right? All of a sudden you're doing things like talking to analysts like Gartner and Forrester, and those things are really important. Like your upmarket large buyers, there's just so much more risk associated to them making the wrong decision. And so there's just so much more education you need to do to make them successful. And so like I always love trying to figure out like how fast you can move up market. And that's the kind of experience I had at both those companies. The thing I would say I learned from both experiences is you have to really know your segments, really define your customers and what the different customers will look like over time as you move up market. And you have to do a ton of upfront research for your larger potential customers around what the product has to look like and what feature and functionality you must have, if not immediately, in the near term, in order to make them successful and for you to be very credible with them. So I would say the biggest lesson I learned there is you have to know your product inside and out and know its capabilities and its shortcomings, so that you can accurately wedge in and figure out how quickly can we move up market. And then in terms of working cross-functionally, how willing is our product partners to move up market and to build these types of things that larger companies will just need just to get entry into them. And so like really developing those relationships and having lots of R&D conversations where you're talking about feature functionality and roadmap, and really aligning to, what are things we're going to build in what order that will help us move up market. And if you're very close to your product team, you guys have a good understanding of what you need to build and over what time period, that will then inform how quickly you can move up market and take on larger potential customers.
Awesome. Love it. What a great explanation, wall to wall on that. Okay. So we're on Dropbox right now. You talked about a bunch of your experiences that transcend the companies you've worked at. Let's talk about, so one quick question on that actually is, how do you make sure, so one of the biggest parts of this is making sure that you have a closed loop process and a closed loop feedback system for product. How do you make sure you do that from a sales leader perspective? What does that stakeholder relationship look like, and kind of what's the cadence there?
Oh, that's a topic I can talk about for a long time. This is something I learned the hard way at Dropbox, because I would say I set myself back by thinking about it wrong early days. So you have to realize that when you move into a role at a certain stage, your idea of your teams changes and the order of priority changes. And so there's this idea of like different teams. So there's the company team, there's your peer team, and then there's your team that you're responsible for. And you actually need to focus on developing relationships in that order. And also your decision-making process has to be in that order. So you have to ultimately, first and foremost, as a senior leader, I don't care what your role is, you have to do what's right for the company, right? And for your customers. Even if that means pushing back or deprioritizing things that short-term would be really beneficial to you and to your team, right? You have to nail that. And if you don't, you're going to have a very short stay on the executive team. The second thing is you have to realize your second team is your peers. It's your cross-functional partners, and they actually come before your team that you're directly responsible for. That's a weird thing to say. And if you haven't been in that role yet, pay attention to it, and you'll feel what I'm talking about at some point in your career, where like your number one priority is understanding the motivations and the priorities of your partners in marketing, in product, in recruiting, really every function, right, in the company. And that's your first team, and you need to support all of them, even if it comes at deprioritizing things that would be important in your team that your team is shouting for. Like, you have to support each other. And so what I learned early from the Dropbox experience that carried over more successfully to my Intercom experience would be make sure you are just very clear on your intentions and why you have the beliefs you do, and develop strong relationships built around trust with your partners. You need them to understand your motivations behind the things you're asking for or that you're lobbying for with them. You're not always going to see eye to eye on the roadmap, as an example, or, from a marketing perspective, the qualification criteria for opportunities, or where you should be investing your SEM and SEO dollars. And so they need to know first and foremost that you're here to help them and make them successful. And you have to show them through your actions that you're willing to put their priorities and their interests ahead of your own teams. And so if you do that really well, you'll get to a place of like deep understanding of each other and a good working relationship. And so, like I said, I set myself back by coming in kind of guns blazing and a little too aggressive. And in Dropbox, and I kind of came in a little too aggressive and was like, we need to build this, then this, then this. They were kind of like, hi, yeah, I'm sorry, what's your name? You've been here for what, a minute? So I didn't realize that there was a lot of work I needed to do there. And fortunately, I kind of was able to rebuild those relationships over time there, but it helped me get off to a faster start at Intercom. And so much of it is like, how are we going to focus on the roadmap that I think is going to be the most beneficial to our current and future customers. And so you have to approach this as a partnership and ask them what type of input they want from you. You just have to make sure that you have an input in their roadmap process. And I learned quickly that R&D teams are much more interested in hearing about problems to be solved versus solutions. Don't tell a PM or head of R&D, hey, I think this is what we should build. Like, that's not going to go well for you ever. But talk about customers. Like, ultimately, all of us are passionate about our customers and wanting to see them be really successful. And no product leader hears when the product they have is painful to their customer, not doing what they need it to do. And so get out of the way and let the voice of your customer just come through very strongly. In fact, take your R&D leaders, if you can, on roadshows and have them just meet with prospective customers, current customers, and former customers, and just get out of the way. Don't voice your opinion, just let the voice come through directly to them. And you'll have a much more engaged and much more open to feedback partner within R&D.
Love it. Wow. Excellent advice. Okay. Moving into Intercom, very natural transition and segue for us to leap into that. Why make the jump to Intercom? What were you responsible for? And I've got one more topic for us to chat about before we wrap up with just another quick question.
Yeah. So I used to get this question a lot when I was interviewing people at Intercom as well. And it was first and foremost, it was my boss. So I was very fortunate to first meet a woman that Laura Beth Harvey, goes by LB.
Quick side story on this. I was LB's SD when I
No, you weren't.
Yes, I was. That is how LB and my relationship started. I know you love that.
That's so good. So I was really fortunate to get to be exposed to and work with LB in a bunch of different capacities in my time together at LinkedIn. And then when I left, we stayed in touch. And if anything, our relationship got tighter. We would just start kind of comparing notes, share war stories. I went to her for advice on a lot of things as I was trying to figure out what the heck I was doing at Dropbox. And I just always really respected her and took so much away from every one of our conversations. And funny enough, like I had known from catching up with her that, after 8 incredible years at LinkedIn, she was starting to think about, potentially going and doing her own thing as a VP of sales at an earlier stage company. And it just so happened that I had been reached out to by someone I knew at Intercom who was doing the executive search. And I was like, he started describing to me what he thought Intercom needed. And I was like, that's LB. That's my friend LB. Like, I remember I was immediately texted her. I'm like, hey, this guy's going to reach out to you. Return his call. And, one thing led to another. And I think literally within like a month, I was doing a reference call for LB with Owen, the CEO of Intercom. And so as she joined, and I never would have recommended she take that call if I didn't think that Intercom was an incredible product solving interesting problems and like really on to something new and nascent and interesting. And so she joined, and then she spent the next couple of months trying to recruit me to come over. And pretty quickly, her remit grew pretty substantially. She initially joined to lead direct sales. And then for a number of reasons, she pretty quickly became responsible also for the customer support team globally, which was a pretty big team, as well as the self-service business, and was responsible for the self-serve kind of revenue as well. And so all of a sudden, she had a lot more responsibility and was like, I really need someone to come help me with this direct sales component of this. And I was like, well, that sounds fun. I've only ever managed to lead and built account executive teams, and I've only ever done it in North America. And so to have an opportunity to come and be responsible for, kind of the full stack, so to speak, of building a commercial team from sales development to account executives to, account managers and success managers and sales engineers, and getting to build new offices in new countries was just like too cool an opportunity to pass up. And to get to do it with a cool company, with someone that I loved and respected and worked with previously, I was like, how could I not do this? So it wasn't really that I felt my time had come to an end at Dropbox. It was more like, this is too cool thing to pass up. And they didn't fight me on it. I think when I laid out to my former boss at Dropbox why I was going to do it, he was kind of like, yeah, that sounds pretty awesome, man. Like, gonna miss you, but like, good luck,
Very cool. Nice one. Oh, LB is amazing for so many reasons. The last topic I want to talk to you about is best practices for building and maintaining those functions. You've had an interesting spectrum that in firsthand managing all these different types of teams. Most of the time, people either inherit them or will take on one at a time. You have firsthand and frontline managed and ultimately manage, leaders of all these different teams. So let's hop through them and just talk about maybe one or two best practices for building and managing that team and the mindset you should have. And that's the last topic I want to talk about. So sales development, one or two best practices for building and managing those teams. So sales development, account executives, account managers, success managers, and sales engineers. Sales development first. One or two best practices, as well as a mindset you should have when building and managing those teams.
Yeah. So, and this kind of applies to all roles. So I take like a half step back is, at some point in our careers, you get to a place where you're responsible for things that you are not an expert in whatsoever. And that can be kind of scary, but like embrace it because it's true of anyone. Like you're going to get to a level where you're like, yeah, I have no idea how this thing works, but I'm now responsible for it. And it's an exciting and terrifying proposition. And so the first thing I would say is that's okay. You're not alone, and everyone gets to a point in their kind of journey and career where they ultimately might have that situation. So the best thing to do in that situation is hire people who know what the hell they're doing. Like the first thing I would say is, and this is what's really scalable, and it's surprising because it seems so simple, but so many companies get this wrong from my experience, is hire in really senior leaders that will scale and build that function for you. And so really make sure, like this is what I did when I started building out a sales engineering team at Intercom is, I had worked with sales engineers. I knew what a great sales engineering partner looked like. I didn't know how to build that function. I didn't know what the right KPIs were. I didn't know what the right comp plans were. Like I had no idea. And I was fortunate to have some friends that led those functions that I could rely on, early days and be like, all right, what the heck do I do here? Like, how does this work? But the sooner you can go and just hire a subject matter expert who's an incredible leader, who's probably overqualified for the role in the short term, convince the company that's the right thing to do because that person will scale that function for you. So that would be my first piece of advice is like, you're going to find yourself in a situation, like go hire an experts and then just trust them, like let them run, create a framework for them, but just let them go and do their thing. And if you've hired really well, like you're going to be fine. So that's what I would say. But back specifically to sales development,
I like it.
Like, what are you looking for? Again, I would focus more on the leaders than versus the reps and individual contributors. So I would think about what are the really important skill sets you need for these different roles for frontline or manager of manager experience. To me, sales development is operational excellence. You need math whizzes. Like I think there's obviously an art to it, but it's also science, and you need data junkies. Like you really want leaders who love looking at conversion rates, open rates, response rates, measuring every little piece of the funnel in the top of the funnel. And also really have an interest in marketing and digital marketing and can develop strong working relationships with your marketing partners. Like focus on people who look and feel like that and have that expertise, and they'll really help you scale that function. For account executives, it's not to say that operational excellence isn't still really important, but I would say look for very strong coaches. I think the mistake a lot of people make is they hire people who are really high performing in their own right as individual contributors and as reps. And like, I just don't think that translates often into people who are going to be amazing leaders. So you need to focus on finding people who are like exceptional coaches, really good listeners, very situationally aware, have very high emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and are very strong when it comes to hiring. You can test for all those things when you're interviewing people, but for AEs and also for that matter, for account managers, that's what you need. You need really amazing coaches. And that's there as I would focus on those leaders early in your early days is look for those softer skills, and those people will be very successful as long as you give them the right guidance. For customer success and for sales engineering, they're more technical roles. And so you also now are looking for people who have a strong affinity for and love for product and kind of geek out on product, and they're builders and they're tinkers in their own right. And like, those are things you see come through in their experience and things they like to spend their time doing outside of work. And so I think you need to look for people who are very biased towards product and working closely with product, geek out on it and are very excited about it. And blend that together with like an amazing ability to, be good coaches and be strong kind of people leaders. And if you look for those things across the different functions, like you're going to do well and you'll be successful. And you'll also be more confident that you can be outside of your bounds of experience and that those people are going to be doing the right things. I think something I see people all the time is when they hire people into disciplines where that's not their area of experience in their domain, they're just like so paranoid about it. And they spend way too much time worrying about whether or not, are we measuring the right things? Is this person really good? Is our team really good? It's like, no, like define on paper, get feedback from others of what you're looking for. Make sure you're clear on the skills you want for that leader, but then just trust them, let them run and do their thing.
Awesome. You've been so generous through the time. I have one more, what I think is a quick question around picking companies. You've done an amazing job, and this is a good transition to move to Tession. You've just gone through this process recently. You've done an amazing job of picking great businesses to work with at the right time for both your experience as well as what you can stretch and learn on as you grow into the scope of the role and as you take it on. What are some of your career navigation and picking company best practices or tips that you have for doing the same?
So first and foremost, look to the team. And if you are considering, joining an early stage company as a VP of sales or in any leadership capacity, first and foremost, it's the team. And I think the older you get, the more experience you have, the more you know what's personally important to you. And I think what you're solving for later in life is more, and the people I'm working with and for, do they have the same philosophical beliefs and values that I have? That's what I would tell you to look for first and foremost is like, do these people believe in the similar things and put the same weight on things that are just like so important to me? And I tell people all the time, like the older I get, the less, the fewer things really matter to me, but the things that do matter to me matter exponentially more. And so like really you start getting a sense of like, what are your core things you must have? You can start just asking and testing for those. So first and foremost, I would say that. Second then is, it depends on what you're going for, but if you like playing this crazy game of high growth company, like you want to be doing it at a company that has like massive upside. Like I think it's silly to say that anyone who's joining as an executive in an early stage company isn't financially motivated. Like I want this thing to be big. I have very meaningful equity, and I want to see that come to fruition for me and for my family. And so like you need to find places where you actually think that company has a chance. And so I think what you're looking for is big market opportunity. Like don't look for niche companies. Look for companies that can sell their products or services to massive audiences. Second, then look for the product or service has to be something that is like to you when you hear it and you learn about it, like this is so straightforward. Why has no one ever done this before? Like anytime I've felt that way, that's when I've made a kind of career decision. That was true of Dropbox, Intercom, and Tession. It's kind of like, this seems so simple. Why has no one done this? And then you start digging and you realize like, oh, this is really hard. But if you have that initial reaction of this is so simple, why haven't we done this? Like this seems such an obvious problem to solve, then you're on to the right thing. And that's the last thing I would say is look for problems to be solved, not for feature functionality. Like that, the way you go to market and the way that product is sold will change and morph so much as you learn more about how this is going to resonate in the market. But like if the executive team that you're joining is focused on what problems they're looking to solve, and you believe that that's a big market opportunity to solve those problems, and no one's really done that before, or these are just new problems, with the evolution of technology and the way we work, that these are just new problems that need to be solved and no one's thought about them yet, like then you're probably onto something. And so that's the last thing I would say, and the plug I would say for Tession is when I met Tim and Ed, our co-founders and our CEO and CTO, I was blown away by them. And I realized like we just saw the world very similarly in terms of our values and the things that informed our decision making and what we were willing to make concessions on and what we weren't. And I just was like so blown away by them and could really envision working well with them. And because if you're joining a company at this stage, like there's gonna be times where you're celebrating, there's gonna be times where you're banging your head against the wall being like, what do we do now? And it's gonna be hard. And you really want to feel as you're coming in as a VP of sales that you're gonna be supported and that you guys are in this together and that you'll work together through the hard times and figure things out. And if you don't feel that way, keep looking. That would be my final advice.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.